She then tells him not to look too sad because the church was built by the Alliance, and O'Brien did this to give witches a chance at redemption. If he wins, he would acquire her memories and experiences, which is a treasure worth 200 years. Maine asks her what she plans to do with the church if she wins. She laments that it will either be victory or destruction. She then exposes him for the secret orders he had made, but she already knows everything about it. In the midst of battle, Maine sent a shipment of supplies to the ports of Everwinter and ensured the ship's maintenance and wages for the crew, which makes her believe he truly leaves no stone unturned. He literally prepared for his own backup plan while taking the throne in front of so many followers. She states that he lost the belief in victory before God even showed himself, so she asks if he really deserves the smile of God. Maine calls this notion of a smile a complete joke, because if God really cared about them, why would he let humanity lose again and again? Not to mention, the battle against the devils still relies on the divine punishment soldiers in the end. Time is of the essence, so he asks her what she can really change by becoming a pope, reminding her how her brethren lost everything 400 years ago. She quickly raises her sword and declares that witches are just a small group within humanity, and this war will determine their survival as a whole. It requires everyone's participation, whether men, women, old, or young. They will all be glorious warriors on the battlefield, ready to defeat the devils or face extinction. Of course, it doesn't take Maine long to realize that she plans to feed everyone berserk pills, and this wicked woman confirms it with a sinister smile. She explains that if one berserk isn't the same as a divine punishment warrior, then 10 should be enough to take down at least one devil. Since there are plenty of demon beasts roaming about right now, they have a stable supply of pills, and their research might even develop new formulas. In 5 years, she believes the church will have 3 or 4 million pills in stock, and the divine punishment army won't be alone. They will be fighting alongside an entire nation of berserkers. Maine calls her crazy for her twisted way of thinking. A pure witch raised by the church would never say something like this, and he's sure her mind has been corrupted by the infidels. But the girl claims that accepting new knowledge is just part of becoming better, and blending ideas brings progress. With that, she decides they should finally determine who will be the real leader of the church. He quickly shoots an arrow, and she dodges it right away. She calls him foolish for believing that demon-breaking arrows would work against him. She comes crashing down with her sword, leaving Maine disoriented, and makes it clear that this world is hers, and he can't possibly win. But that's when the red mist those devils breathe begins to surround the area, and the lady starts to burn and suffer from it. Pope Maine reveals to her that this mist is a hidden mechanism and is only harmful to magical witches. Once it spreads throughout the entire plaza, she will die over and over, no matter what. The girl snickers at the tactic the Pope has, but she quickly begins to heal herself. She admits that he indeed has some tricks up his sleeve after all. She then tells him that if he had gone to the Holy Library beforehand, perhaps this battle would be even harder for her. But that's just how the Battle of Souls is so much fun. She quickly starts to use wind magic, repelling all of the red mist. This pushes Maine to desperate measures, forcing him to take the berserk pills himself. As soon as he gulps the pills down, Zero also summons a giant shining sword. And once she takes her stance, she almost looks like the former queen of the witches, Alice. That's when she reveals that absorption isn't her only talent. She also values observation and learning. With that, she throws the swords crashing down, and that's how Maine finally meets his end. The knights quickly grab the Pope's robe and put it over her right away, addressing her with the title of Pope. The scene then transitions to the border town castle, where we see Ferlin and his father, Duke Eltec, present. Both father and son are sweating in front of him due to the heat. The prince tells them that they can take off their coats if it's too hot because the castle now has a heating system, making it much warmer inside than outside. He wouldn't want either of them to feel uncomfortable. The both of them take off their warm jackets, and Ferlin inquires more about this heating solution, to which the prince reveals that it's a new way to provide warmth, and it's much more efficient than a fireplace. He then gets back to business and asks both of them if they came looking for Agatha. He tells them that they better take off their stones of divine judgment for the sake of respect if they want to meet her. Once the stones are out of the way, we see that Agatha also arrives in the dining hall right at that moment and asks the prince why he called her. With her usual arrogance, she reminds him that the divine war is about to begin and that she needs to hurry and focus on weapon production. If it's not urgent, She wants him to just send a message next time. To which the prince tells her that this is quite important, and promptly asks if she remembers when Takia fell 400 years ago. There was a servant group that broke off and followed other survivors to the south of the mountains. Agatha thinks for a moment and agrees that there was, but she asks him why it matters since it's been a long time. That's when Duke Eltec dashes toward her, and both father and son kneel before her. The man reveals that he is a descendant of Cage and asks if she remembers that name, to which she replies that she remembers it because she was the one who named him. She bought 2 servants. One of them was Kraft, who was the leader of the family's patrol guard, and the other was Cage, who was the butler. She throws them a look of disdain as she asks if they're claiming to be descendants of the butler who secretly escaped with the magic stones and research records. The bearded man quickly refutes such intentions, but Agatha doesn't even bother to listen to what they're trying to say. She orders them to leave, stating that she doesn't want to see any of them. With that, she begins to walk away, leaving the 2 of them on the ground, shouting for her to stop. The bearded man even withers on the ground, and right at that moment, Nightingale pops up. The prince asks her what is going on and if she can see anything. Nightingale quickly reports that both of them were telling the truth. It doesn't take the prince long to realize that telling the truth isn't necessarily related to what's happening in reality, which makes him believe that there's something wrong with the family records. The prince then tells the man that he doesn't have to return to Longsong Fortress right away, as he can stay at Ferlin's house and visit their town for a while. He assures them that he will ask them about the details of what happened, so there's a chance that she might finally talk to them. The bearded man acknowledges this and thanks him for it. The prince excitedly asks about the magic stones and records they have brought here. The bearded man reveals that everything is currently in their boat's cargo hold, and there are about 10 chests. The prince is sure that her feelings may soften when she sees her belongings preserved from 400 years ago. Later, all of the chests finally make their way to the Bordertown Castle storeroom. Sylvie takes an observant look and assures them that there doesn't seem to be any danger, so they can open the chests. The prince then tells Agatha that she should listen to Duke Eltec's story. It doesn't matter what her butler did. At least he wanted to return these to their owner. Perhaps it was an effort to repay her for the mistakes they had made. Agatha states that her butler seems to have deceived his descendants and himself. She believes that these people don't owe her anything since witches have lost their power in this era. There's no reason for those who still have power to feel indebted to her or to treat her with any special regard. The prince goes speechless and reluctantly admits that she has a point. However, he still believes that she seems to blame them needlessly. She also agrees that it's unnecessary for her to take out her anger on those descendants, especially since they don't even know what happened back then. The prince then decides to explain this to them personally. He then asks her about these belongings, to which she states that these things don't belong to her, as they are the Scholarly Guild's property. Meanwhile, Tilly opens one of the chests out of curiosity and discovers big shiny stones inside. The prince already knows that these stones were transformed from stones of divine judgment, and a stone of this size would be worth around 300 golden royals. But Agatha reminds him that there is more to that, explaining that magic stones can only be created by chaos beasts, which makes them invaluable, so no amount of money could ever be enough to represent their true worth. Tilly grabs one and asks what kind of stones these are since they don't seem very portable. Agatha explains that they are glowstones. She pours a little magic into one, and the stone begins to shine brightly with a blinding light. The prince is quite excited to see these because they are an excellent source of light before the era of electrical engineering. Anna then asks how these stones were chiseled to different sizes since they were originally stones of divine judgment. It doesn't seem possible that they could have been cut with magic since witches can't go near stone of divine judgment, and a huge natural stone seems to be very resilient, not something that pickaxes could break. Agatha doesn't quite understand what Anna means by huge divine stones, so the prince explains that they are at the bottom of the border town mines, tied to a treasure map that has been passed down through the Eltec family. They also used it to find her laboratory. The lady smiles and agrees that the map was indeed used by the Scholarly Guild to mark the locations of stone veins, prepared for future holy cities. This leaves everyone present feeling a bit clueless. So Agatha further explains that every holy city was built upon veins of divine judgment stones. Besides facilitating research on the relationship between magic and its stones, it was also to prevent conflicts between witches from spreading over large areas. It's similar to the Badlands that border the mountain ranges, what people here call the Plains of Hermes, where the church's holy city is currently located. Tilly thinks that since the church kept the name Holy City, it's even more likely they are the inheritors of the Alliance. Agatha adds that if humanity hadn't suffered such a devastating loss in the last Divine War, a holy city would have been built on these northern slopes. The prince, on the other hand, lets out a heavy sigh, relieved that the church didn't build their holy city in the western region. Otherwise, he would have to focus on defenses while trying to expand his industry, and just the thought of it annoys him. Agatha explains that magic stones can't really be manipulated by force. Breaking them down requires a special chemical solution that contains the magical blood of witches or demons. Sylvie gasps in shock upon hearing this. Agatha goes on to clarify that since every magic stone is different, the amount of blood needed can vary. Back in the Holy City, adult witches are required to donate their blood regularly, and since extracted blood quickly loses its magic once it leaves the bodies, it has to be used immediately. The Alliance orders suitable witches to donate blood every 2 to 3 years, and of course, captured demons are used for the same purpose. Anna asks if Agatha has done this too, to which Agatha replies positively, revealing that even the third seat of the Alliance is no exception. Then Sylvie wonders about demons since some hybrid ones seem to have magic. Agatha agrees, saying that's true, but it's only a small amount. They're useful for dealing with fragments, but not the actual veins themselves. Once the stones are cut away, their strength decreases significantly based on their size, and their effective range is reduced too. For example, the stones that mortals carry around can be easily broken with an iron hammer. The prince asks if the scholarly guild has ever found ways to create magic stones other than from chaos beasts. Agatha acknowledges this, saying that there have been witches in the guild who managed to transform stones of divine judgment into regular stones, but that was just removing their magic. They were never able to create even the simplest glowstone. And since Sylvie can detect magic, she can actually see what the stones look like on the inside. Sylvie agrees that she can see, saying it looks like a weak cloud of mist. Agatha explains that the Scholarly Guild once collected statistics from thousands of witches and stones, and found that before Ascension, most magic took the form of mist, swirling powder, or flame. While these details might look similar, they determine countless variations of magic, which is why they believed there were no identical abilities. Then Tilly notices that the light from the stone is getting dimmer. Agatha explains that it's because she infused only a tiny amount of magic into it. Tilly then mentions that she's seen magic stones still glowing in some underwater ruins at the bay. If those ruins were built by her people, that means the stones have been lit for at least hundreds of years, which doesn't make any sense. Tilly wonders if maybe some members of the Alliance visited that place. But Agatha points out that it's quite possible to keep a stone lit for a long time. It just requires the collaboration of 10 or more witches. They can do this through the transfer of magic. Some witches can provide magic for others or swap gathered magic between two people, which means the person who enchanted it wasn't alone. Tilly puts a bit of her magic into the stone, and it starts shining brightly again, leaving her over the moon. The prince mentions that this is still really useful for the castle. Just think about it. The castle can be lit up even at night. Agatha agrees as well, adding that it'll be even better in the laboratory. After all, a candle's open flame is too dangerous. This leaves the prince a bit bewildered, thinking about how an 8-hour workday isn't enough for her, and now she wants to work overtime at night. Anyhow, the prince starts looking through the chests, wondering if the books inside are records of experiments. Agatha pretends to clear her throat to cover up the truth and explains that some of them are the Codex of Principles. Of course, the prince quickly picks up on her tone and asks if there's some secret she's trying to hide. Sylvie then notices something strange about the chests. There seems to be a false bottom that she hadn't seen earlier because she thought it was just a normal gap. Anna eagerly tries to unveil what's hidden beneath the false bottom, and they pull out a box that leaves everyone curious. The prince gets a bit excited, thinking there might be some cool treasure that the Scholarly Guild left for them. He's not too far off with his guess, as Agatha goes absolutely bananas when she spots something called a divine sigil. She frantically looks inside the other chests, wondering if her butler Cage might have stolen it from the Scholarly Guild. The prince gives an awkward smile, thinking maybe a caravan was attacked, and someone entrusted Cage with it. After all, it's been 400 years, so it doesn't really matter where it came from. But he wants to know what this divine sigil actually is. Agatha explains that some magic stones have additional effects when their magic is combined. They can change the nature of magic or provide a boost. This was one of the Scholarly Guild's main research topics. Combined magic stones are called sigils, and divine sigils are the most powerful kind. She also adds that these magic stones all come from high-tier devils, and the entire region of Tequila only had about 3 or 4 of them. Curiously, the prince asks how powerful these things are, to which Agatha replies that she could reduce his castle to pieces in an instant. Of course, that doesn't sit well with the prince, leaving him feeling absolutely anxious. Agatha reassures him that he doesn't need to worry, as it takes an immense amount of magic to activate. The more stones a sigil contains, the harder it is to use. Only the top 2 seats in the Alliance could ever manage something like this. Basically, only transcendent witches can use it, because the way they channel magic is completely different from normal witches. It's like they're constantly training their powers. Once they ascend, their magic will eventually reach its peak. That's when Anna nearly blinds everyone by trying to activate the sigil, and a blinding light floods the area. The light is so intense it shoots out of the castle windows like a laser, and Agatha, on the verge of going blind, yells at Anna to let go. Finally, the light begins to die down, and it turns out Anna had perfect control over it the whole time, while Sylvie, standing nearby, feels like someone just bleached her eyes. Agatha breathes a sigh of relief, and Anna casually mentions that it's actually pretty draining, and she thinks she can only use it twice. Even though she says it offhandedly, everyone knows being able to use it twice is nothing to scoff at. The scene shifts to show our little girl, Paper, hanging her laundry out to dry. Wendy arrives and tells her to get some breakfast. Like any doting mother, she asks the little one if she brushed her teeth and everything, adding that she's going to check really quick. Wendy promptly hugs the girl, and she can tell that Paper is indeed clean through and through. Then she takes Paper's hand, and they walk together toward the dining hall. Once they arrive, we see Lightning and Maggie arguing over who will try using the sigil first. Eventually, Lightning decides to give it a go. As she warms up before starting, Paper asks what they're doing. Wendy explains that her sisters are testing their combat points, which is some weird term the prince came up with, and that they don't have to worry about it. She points to a silver square, telling Paper that it's something the witches from the past left behind about 400 years ago. This is what transcendent witches used to fight, so the prince gave it to her sisters to measure their magic levels. Lightning tries her hardest, but after all that effort, she barely manages to make the sigil shine a little, with only 2 gems lighting up. Maggie feels proud, boasting that she can easily get 2.5 gems to glow. The 2 girls start bickering and playfully arguing in the background, while Wendy asks Paper if she wants to try as well. Wendy quickly adds, though, that it might be too early for her since she hasn't learned how to infuse magic into stones yet, so she probably wouldn't be able to activate the sigil. But it's part of the mandatory curriculum, so they'll be getting glowstones to practice with soon. Suddenly, Paper doubles over, clutching her belly in pain, and says that it feels like her magic is trembling, as if it wants to burst out. Wendy quickly asks if she remembers when she first became a witch. Paper answers that it happened during winter, but she doesn't remember exactly when. Wendy realizes that it's already the end of fall, which means winter is approaching. The closer a witch is to their awakening day, the stronger their magic becomes, which is a sign of the antiphase. She pulls Paper into a comforting hug, reassuring her that antiphase is no longer a life or death matter for the witches of Border Town. The next day, Wendy arrives in the office along with Paper to meet the prince. It looks like Paper has signed all the contract papers, and the prince is glad to see this and reminds her that from this point onward, she's officially a member of the Witch Union. Wendy mentions how amazing Paper was last night, fighting through the pain and staying conscious without giving up. She adds that they had a special team to cheer her on, but it might have been a bit too much for Paper. Paper starts to tear up, saying that's not true. She feels really happy and isn't uncomfortable at all. The prince is glad to hear this, and that's when Wendy notices the book he's reading. The prince explains that it's a translated record of all the sigils that the Scholarly Guild left behind. It contains all the recipes that the guild found over the course of 200 years. Nightingale then appears, asking him why he finds these sigils so interesting. She reminds him that even though the Witch Kingdom had a bunch of these sigils, they still lost to the devils. The prince admits that he finds them interesting because it's an entirely new horizon for him to explore. He reveals that the documents list countless uses for magic stones and their combinations, but it's like a whole textbook. For example, He can take an echo stone and a marking stone and put them together to create a listening sigil. It seems like whatever the prince just explained went way over their heads. He continues, explaining that according to the book, this listening sigil could stretch up to 3 miles. It might be nothing compared to phones in a world of satellites and signal towers, but it's enough for short-range communication. Nightingale adds that the book says echo stones come from fearsome devils, while marking stones are found in devil camps. She asks him how he plans to get those. The prince reminds her that they already have them. The red stone that Lightning found in the stone tower was an echo stone, and the marking stone is used for tracking sigils. Tilly brought a bunch of them, so they just need to break one down. He then reveals his plan to build a high tower next to the witch building to research and craft Agatha's sigils. Witches and mage towers, he thinks it's all going to be amazing. Later, when he discusses the idea of a mage tower, Agatha finds it ridiculous and calls it unnecessary. She insists that all she needs is a chemistry lab like Kyle's, maybe just a bit more spacious. Besides, she thinks building a tower like that would be troublesome, pointing out that Tequila had towers due to its small size, but they have plenty of land here. The prince sheds a tear of disappointment, muttering that it would have been more thematic. He sighs and reminds her not to worry about the construction. Then he asks if she'd need any other rooms besides a bedroom, office, and apprentice dorms. Agatha replies that if he really wants a tower, then no. Nightingale snickers to see the prince get defeated by Agatha like this. Agatha then explains that they can only build one listening sigil with what they have right now, but if they were to fight devils, they could acquire more. Now that she's mentioned it, the prince reveals there's something written on the last page. Nightingale curiously asks about his findings, but he startles her by asking about her combat points for activating the sigil. Nightingale just shrugs it off nonchalantly, saying it's a secret she can't reveal. The prince notices that she might be embarrassed about Anna's score, which is probably why she doesn't want to share. Anyway, he reveals to them that in this book, the recipe for the stones is unknown, and he's not sure if the scholarly guild didn't write it down for secrecy. But then Agatha chimes in, stating that those stones all come from high-tier devils, and even if it was written, they wouldn't really be able to get them. She can't believe he would think something so precious would just be left sitting around in the lobby. Agatha further explains that sigils might be the connection between different magic stones, but the ingredients required in the process are incredibly complicated. Most importantly, it requires the blood of devils. The prince is absolutely shocked to hear this. Agatha, on the other hand, doubles down on her statement, confirming that it's precisely true and that it requires fresh devil blood. The scholarly guild conducted thousands of experiments while researching the nature of magic, and ultimately concluded that witches, devils, and demons have inherently different magical properties in their flesh and blood. The prince is left in shock after hearing all about flesh and blood. She further drops some truth bombs that the magical properties in witches' blood are used to create divine punishment soldiers. Prince then asks if dead witches can be used, to which Agatha sadly replies that it has to be fresh. This leaves the prince speechless and Nightingale horrified. Agatha continues, explaining that this was the most securely guarded secret of the scholarly guild, and she left the Holy City Tower precisely because of it. She explains that all she knew was that they were mixing the blood of old witches with stones of divine judgment and injecting it into mortals to change their bodies. And as we know, that experiment was likely a success. The prince then asks how much blood it requires, to which Agatha replies that it needs at least half of a witch's blood. This revelation leaves the prince sweating bullets. Agatha further explains that the blood has to come from one person. Otherwise, the magic in the blood will repel each other and inhibit its efficiency. So every experiment resulted in one witch dying. Not only that, but it was also difficult for mortals to withstand the blood. In the beginning, no humans survived, and there were plenty of members who argued that there was no way for mortals to achieve magic at all. But if it weren't for Alice's insistence, this method of divine soldier production would never have succeeded. The prince then adds that now the church has vast armies of divine punishment soldiers, and according to Tilly's report, they have anywhere between 500 to 1,000. Agatha mentions that even if the success rate increased tenfold, it still means a lot of witches were sacrificed. She's sure that the number of old witches would never be enough to mass-produce this many soldiers. It doesn't take long for the prince to realize that the church captured and raised witches to use their fresh blood and create warriors. What annoys him the most is that there were hundreds of witches with unique abilities who were murdered at Hermes. and the church vilified them as satanic beings. Before his head can explode out of sheer frustration, Nightingale places a reassuring hand on his shoulder, helping him calm down. At this point, the prince is convinced that a dangerously foolish organization like this must be destroyed. It does not matter if they are fighting devils or not. He vows to destroy them at all costs. Later that night, we see Wendy stepping out after a refreshing bath. She tells Nightingale to go for a bath as well. However, Wendy finds herself shocked when she sees Nightingale actually studying Natural Sciences 101. It surprises her so much that she loses her grip on her towel and it falls to the floor. Wendy asks her if something happened between her and the prince that led her to study out of the blue. Nightingale then decides to share everything, and the scene transitions to a bit earlier when the prince looks at her dejected face. He asks if she plans to go against the church alone, but Nightingale states that she isn't that foolish. If the church could be toppled by just a single witch, someone would have done it already. The prince explains that the church created divine punishment soldiers to increase its own strength, which means they wouldn't waste powerful witches for blood. Even the mist can't guarantee her safety against those soldiers. The prince wants to handle the church strategically, believing that the best approach will be to launch a steady offense with the First Army once the war officially begins. He assures Nightingale that he's determined to build a new world where witches will be treated as equals to mortals, and their lives will be valued just as any other. Nightingale moves closer with a smile on her face and expresses her confidence that he will make it happen. Back in the present, Nightingale explains that this vision is her motivation for studying. She wants to become stronger, so she can be more useful in the fight against the church. Wendy, meanwhile, is shocked as she realizes that all those nunneries built by the church were really just harvesting centers for fresh blood. She reflects on how if Ash hadn't saved her, she would have shared the same fate as other witches who died at the hands of the church. This revelation fuels Wendy's determination to improve, and she also wants to catch up to her sisters, who are working hard. So she agrees with Nightingale that it's finally time to get stronger. From now on, she will follow the example of her sisters and spend an hour each night learning the prince's knowledge before sleeping. She tells Nightingale they should do their best together. However, it seems that Nightingale has already reached her limit, as she has dozed off already. Well, what can you expect of